All right, so this is not going to be as much of a breakdown episode as it's going to be an episode talking about my feelings and my thoughts on this episode versus the manga. So let's get started. So, as I said in the last review that I did, that the manga is something I've actually been reading as these episodes have been going along, and I've been trying to keep up with it, but I've been usually reading it directly after the recording of the video of like whatever this breakdown ends up being. This time around, though, I was so worried and so confused and sad and had a lot of questions. Mostly confused and sad about what they did with the fight between Gokutsu and Saitama. So in this episode, we see, of course, that Gokutsu goes up against Saitama, which is something I've been very excited for the past few episodes. But we also had, of course, the, Bakuzan fighting against Saitama, and it was taken out, like, I expected it to be a one-punch sort of deal, but okay, I'm going to collect my thoughts here. Let me get right into the problem I have. This episode feels like a copy-paste of the manga, which is normally a good thing, but it doesn't visually pay off in any way that is better than the manga. In fact, in the manga, it feels almost like they convey motion better than in this. Like, it doesn't even make sense to say out loud, but it literally feels like the movements in the manga, the way that a still image is drawn, carries better fluid motion than an animated episode. And I think the other big problem I have, and this was an idea that I was trying to get out while I was talking to a couple other people about it, is that the manga pays off this fight between Bakuzan and Saitama in the exact same way that the episode does. This episode and the manga are exactly the same in the way that they pay off the Bakuzan fight, which is essentially Bakuzan tries a bunch of things to just kick and punch Saitama. Nothing works, and then Saitama goes, I don't even remember who you are, blows him away with a punch. Okay, cool. I could kind of forgive that because it was basically Bakuzan was in the way of what would end up being the Gokutsu and Saitama fight. And of course, with Suryu being there taken out, Saitama talks to him for a minute. Suryu tries to keep Saitama from going. Saitama goes anyway to face Gokutsu. And we see these distant explosions, or hear these distant explosions and punches. And it's, it's just done off camera. And then Gokutsu's head lands in the arena in front of Suryu. And I was so confused for the longest time after watching this about why the show would have done it this way. I'm like, they clearly they had to have cut something out of the episode, out of the manga, to make it fit in this episode for some reason. And it was so confusing to me why they would do that. So I made an exception, and instead of recording this episode and then going and reading the manga, I wanted to make sure that I was 100% informed about what this fight actually entailed. And I went and I read the manga chapter, and sure enough, this is exactly how the fight goes down. Why then would they do this? I was so confused, and I had to kind of step back and think for a couple minutes, a couple hours, and think about how this would have made sense in any writer's mind, how they would have done this. And I thought of a reason that makes sense in the manga, but doesn't make sense for the anime. So in the manga, and in this episode, immediately after that fight, we have Saitama talking with King, and King is telling him about how becoming a true hero, like basically he's teaching him, even though King is not actually technically a hero, he's not very powerful, he is telling Saitama all the things that what it means to be a true hero, because Saitama is saying he's bored with fighting, he's become too strong, nothing enjoys him or excites him, nothing really helps anymore. His emotions, his joy, his general feelings are waning. And King is trying to be like, okay, well, you actually, there's other things other than just being the strongest to being a hero. So it makes sense that directly after a very unfulfilling fight, Saitama has this conversation about being unfulfilled, not excited, how every fight feels the same, and he's starting to be bored by it. Now, in the manga, this is something that has slowly been alluded at, where it's sort of, obviously he's too strong, all of his fights end in one punch, and this most recent one was basically played off as an unseen gag, and it was a perfect example of empathetic storytelling. I've used this term before in one of my other reviews, but empathetic storytelling is where the writer of the show, manga, whatever, is trying to make you, as the viewer, feel the same way as the character in the show. A perfect example of this is going to be in spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen Gurren Lagann, skip to this point here in the episode. So, in Gurren Lagann, there's a point where Kamina is dead, and we have Simon mourning his death for so many episodes, to the point where even as a viewer, it is not enjoyable to watch. You just feel so depressed and not fulfilled by each episode as we see Simon go further and further and further down into this spiral of depression. And just as you and I, the viewers, are getting sick of this feeling and this emotion that we keep seeing with Simone and this depression, just as we're getting tired of that, that is exactly the same time that other surrounding characters are getting tired of that. And once Simone comes back and becomes the hero that we all know him to be in the later parts of the season, that is when we as the viewers are also at our lowest point of enjoyment. And the scale and the rise in the enjoyment and the rise in the feelings of happiness and power come back to not just Simone, but you as the viewer. So in the manga for One Punch Man, they do that, and you feel the unfulfilled, no satisfaction sort of setup that they put into this fight. You feel that because you wanted this fight to be awesome, and it's not. It is just blasé, bland, bleh. And the manga conveys that perfectly. But that is because leading up to this point, everything in the manga had been kind of leading towards this, but in a way that was fulfilling through and through, but slowly getting a little less fulfilling in a way. Each fight kind of weans you back from the action into the unsatisfaction. The problem is, it didn't translate into the anime, because the anime for this season hasn't really felt 100% fulfilling from the start. It's not to say that it's been bad, but the difference is that your scale is set so high from season 1, and if you're reading the manga, your scale is set so high to begin with. So when this happens in the manga, that drop is something you feel. Whereas in this, our expectations were already lowered because of the drop in quality from season 1 to season 2, and because of that, the drop is less, and it's confused. Instead of being an empathetic storytelling moment, because the drop is so much smaller than the drop in the manga for your emotions, that drop is confused with just not good writing, or they had to have skipped something. And while the follow-up scene in this very episode of Saitama getting counsel from King, and King actually making a lot of sense despite the fact that he has no idea what it's like to actually be a true hero, all of that is perfectly done, and I think JC Staff, the company or the studio producing this show, would do a phenomenal job at slice of life and general talking anime. It's just with this kind of stuff, they don't do it well. Because the talking points in this show are phenomenal. They did a great job with King interacting with Saitama. The gag with freaking Garo showing up and getting kicked through a wall because he thought that King was going to fight him and instead it was Saitama kicking him away. Like, that was done perfectly. But it's the fights. It's the way that they convey fighting in this series that doesn't do well, and it drives me insane because you have this okay series that has this one moment that drops a little, and it's not a far enough drop to be like they did this on purpose. It's just a drop that's far enough to be like this is trash. And it just pisses me off to no end with this stuff. And it took me forever to come up with the reasoning because I was so confused that I actually had to reference the source material before I normally do to see what they were actually trying to do and what it ended up being. So overall, this episode was a perfect recreation of the manga chapter. The problem is that the manga chapter is following up to so many things that were done poorly in the animation that are now being brought in as perfect recreations. So you don't have that high to low point like you do in the manga. You just have medium to low. And, going down a 10-foot slide at a 85-degree angle versus going down a 4-foot slide at like a 20-degree angle, the feeling is so different, and it's not going to get any better. And that just pisses me off to no end, because I love this series and I'm loving the manga more and more. But I just don't feel like this episode hit the mark, because while it worked for the manga, it didn't work for the anime. Sorry that this was a bit of a rant. I had to get into film nerd kind of setup and story and script writing nerd kind of setup in my brain to understand what was going on here. I hope you guys followed along, but if you didn't, I am sorry. But if you did, hey, this is why this episode was so unfulfilling for you. Because they didn't do it well, and they've desensitized your brain to this mediocre setup, so the less mediocre or the more mediocre, it really doesn't matter because it's just mediocre. Sorry. I know I've been saying I've been enjoying this, and the animation has kind of been something I've hit on but kind of ignored at this point, but this was not an issue with animation. This was an issue with story pacing and storytelling. So yeah, I don't think they're going to be putting more effort into the show. I think we are at where we're going to be. This is the threshold, this is the level, and anything below that that's supposed to have emotional weight like it does in the manga isn't going to do anything. Sorry to rag on this, but that's just kind of how I feel. Either way, guys, thank you very much for watching this. This was the whole review. This was all I wanted to say about this episode, because while we see things happening in the background, I really don't even want to talk about it right now. It's leading into some fun stuff, it looks like, but it's going to be fun at that lower level that I've already talked about. So we'll see where it goes. But otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode. Let me know if you think I'm on point, if I'm missing it, if I have no clue what I'm talking about. I mean, I did get to college, I did go to college for this, so that's part of why I had to get into my film nerd mode again. But yeah. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this oddly short, it's like going to be way shorter than normal review of this episode. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Make sure to be there and have a good one.